On today's episode of Locked On Canadiens, a Habs legend endorses Carey Price.
You're Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to episode 1125 of Locked On Canadiens. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day and subscribing on YouTube and wherever you subscribe to podcasts. Doing that supports the show and ensures you don't miss an episode, which is way more important. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I am Ian Boisvert, also known as @MaybeIt'sIan, and I am joined by the incomparable Laura Saba, also known as the Active Stick. Laura, how are we doing today?
We are doing great over here. I'm actually really excited to talk about this because, if anyone has listened to this podcast or read anything I've written or anything at all, if you've read a tweet, you'll know how much I love Carey Price. So I'm so excited for Carey Price content right now.
Yeah, I'm just super glad that, someone broached the subject at the Serge Savard golf tournament. They asked Ken Dryden if he thought Carey Price was going to be raised to the rafters in Montreal, to which he responded essentially, I don't have a say in the matter, and this is a quote, I think the answer is pretty clear. And Laura, I think, it's pretty obvious what he meant by that. Ken Dryden is one of the greatest goaltenders in NHL history and in obviously Montreal Canadiens history. He's very much endorsing Carey Price to be raised to the rafters, to be the last player in Canadiens history to wear the number 31. How does that make you feel? Like, what goes through your mind when you hear stuff like that?
Well, as you were reading what he was saying, and I know it wasn't much, it was clearly an endorsement. I was getting goosebumps, right? I think for me, the biggest thing about Ken Dryden is we've had Habs legends weigh in before, and we've also been upset at what they've said, right? Like, I remember every couple of years, Guy Lafleur would be interviewed on the radio, say something, and everybody in this fan base would be up in arms, right? But then continue to acknowledge that he's a legend, right? He was a little bit of a loose cannon. Whereas Ken Dryden, the thing about Ken Dryden is that he's very thoughtful in what he says. He's very methodical about his approach to everything. Like, if you read his work, if you've heard him talk, you know that everything that he does is well thought out. So for me, somebody who has played the game at a time where, the Montreal Canadiens were legends. All the players on the ice were legends. The team itself was legendary, always breaking records, always winning. For him to endorse somebody who in the NHL does not have the same accolades that, let's say, like in Olympics history or whatever, like, who does acknowledge that. And I think the biggest thing is for that endorsement to come, like somebody who's seen the greatest to say that this is also somebody who belongs with us as one of the greatest, is a huge endorsement. Like, I think for me, it validates a lot of our fandom of Carey Price. It validates a lot of, there were so many naysayers as well. Like, with the Montreal Canadiens, it was like, well, they didn't win a cup with him. Well, who was in front of him, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of like that kind of nuance. And also, like, obviously opposing team fans love to come out of the woodwork and diminish what he's accomplished and diminish this. And I think for me, there's a couple more things. I keep saying I think for me. I'm saying this from my perspective, but I hope that there are people that share this. It's not just that Carey Price was for a long period of time the best goaltender in the game. That is undisputed. Like, that is indisputable, I would say. It's also the doors he opened for Indigenous children. He would not have been the first Indigenous player in NHL history or whatever, but because there was such a spotlight on him, because he was able to be so great, like, he did his best to give back to his community and open doors. And a lot of times, like, you would see like coverage of whatever he was doing in terms of charity work or reaching out, there would be children saying, he makes me feel like I can do the same thing. And he was representation for them. So I think both of those things, where he was the greatest, did he change the game? I think he elevated everyone else. And that was a big thing, is that people changed their games in a minor way. It's not like he invented a new style of goaltending. But what I saw was that there were kids that would emulate him. There were peers that would change their game to be more like his, right? And
Yeah.
I think that to me is, in today's world, we don't have the same luxury of before, like somebody being the first person to do a thing in the game, the first person to goal, to do this kind of goaltending, like butterfly or whatever it is. We don't have the luxury of that. Like the NHL right now is so it's so full of talent, but all that talent has money and support behind them that enables them to really perform at their best. So you're not getting revolutionary anymore. But what you are getting is somebody like Carey Price, like he's the best and he makes other people elevate their game. There are people that emulate his style of play. They want to do that. And then we interviewed prospects that would talk about, how Carey Price was somebody that they wanted to be goaltenders like. So from my perspective, I think he absolutely deserves to have his number retired. And I think for Ken Dryden to say that or to endorse it, I think it's huge. It's massive.
Yeah, I think so too. And the one part about it that I think really stuck with me was him saying, well, I have no say in the matter, which is interesting to me because I think his words should carry a lot of weight. No, like, he's one of the most iconic goalies in NHL history. And I say that because if you're watching on YouTube, over my right shoulder is a painting of his mask. Like he is a cultural icon in Montreal. There's no formal process for retiring a jersey. Every team is allowed to do it however they want. It's not like the Hall of Fame where, they do the same process as like selecting a pope where a bunch of old guys get into a room and pick who they want to go in that year. There's no process for this. I absolutely think guys like Ken Dryden should be consulted when they're talking about a player going into the rafters because they're joining them, right? Like Ken Dryden's already up there, like he is greatness personified. And to the point of, people who say, well, Carey Price never won anything. Well, not at the NHL level, not as on a team, basis, but the way that I look at Hall of Fame inductions, because he's going to end up there in very short order. Were you the greatest at your position for any extended period of time while you were playing? And the answer for Carey Price is no duh. Like absolutely he was. All of those player surveys that we see that are like, who's the goalie you're most worried about facing? All of them always said Carey Price. Even when his game did slip a little bit towards the end, they were all still terrified of playing him because they knew he could just turn it on. The bubble season where they, the COVID season where the season ended and then they picked it back up in the two cities in Canada. The Penguins hated the format because they knew they were going to have to play Carey Price in a best of 5 series. And despite the fact that the Canadiens were like the 23rd ranked team in the league that year, Carey Price was horrifying to them. And that's a team that had Evgeny Malkin and Sidney Crosby, not in the primes of their careers, but still, world beaters in their own right, terrified of this guy. So like, to me, it's a no-brainer that he's in the Hall of Fame. Because remember too, like it's not the NHL Hall of Fame, it's the Hockey Hall of Fame. Yeah, he never won a cup, but he does have a Vezina. He does have a Hart Trophy. He has a World Junior Gold. He has an Olympic Gold. He has a Calder Cup. Does that matter? I don't know if that matters. It should. He has a Calder Cup.
I mean, he did and he was like a huge part of that run too, right? Like
Yeah.
he was the guy in that run. Like that, I think people forget that. And so that does break my heart every single time I think about it. It's like everything but the Stanley Cup. But I think, especially when you talk about Olympic gold, like the way he made it so easy. I don't know if anyone really remembers that tournament because there's always so much emotion involved in the Olympics, but the way he made it look so easy. It was the most no-brainer choice, to take him, obviously. And I think, I just remember I think there were pictures of his wife and his dad. They were like holding the medal and stuff like that. And I was just like that is there's so much weight to that because it was so effortless for him.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to that point, the whole award trophy I just went through, it's very similar to one Henrik Lundqvist, who also has his jersey retired by the New York Rangers, is also in the Hall of Fame. Like he has a very similar career arc, except he doesn't have a heart, but most goalies don't win a Hart Trophy. That was out of this world season that we like. In the way that goaltending is going right now, I don't know if we'll ever see something like that again, at least not, in the foreseeable future. But it's a very similar career arc for another goalie who was horrifying to play against. So we have to get over this whole you need a cup to have a legacy thing. There are 32 teams in this league now. It is not something like, most of the Canadiens Cups, I know Canadiens fans hate to hear this, came when there were 6 teams in the league.
Which is true.
It's not the same NHL anymore. Greatness, changes from a team accolade standpoint to an individual standpoint. And Carey Price was, throughout his career, absolutely great. And I think that's where we will leave that conversation for now. Up next, we're going to take a look at some potential offer sheets. But first, it's summertime, and that means one thing to me: baseball. There's nothing better than getting down to the park, grabbing a hot dog, a cold beverage, and watching some of the best athletes battle it out on the diamond. Last summer, I was lucky enough I got to see Shohei Ohtani come to New York when he was still with the Angels and play against the Mets. And I got to do that because of Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals and all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets, which will make it easier for me and some friends to get to the Orioles-Red Sox clash this weekend in Baltimore. Right now, less than $60 gets you into the ballpark for that one, and because of their all-in pricing, I know I'm not going to get hit with any hidden fees at checkout. And with their lowest price guarantee, I know I'm going to get the best possible price for my seat, or Gametime will credit me 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Laura, we are back. But before we jump back in, I do want to thank you for making Locked On Canadiens your first listen of the day. For your second listen to Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insights on every team in the league. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Laura, for a mid-August, middle
Thought
of the week.
Exercise?
Yeah. Well, thought exercise, but also we had legitimate offer sheets today.
Yes.
Which, the offer sheet is something that Mark Bergevin tried to bring back, and it absolutely acted like he stepped on a rake in the middle of a field, because it went miserably for him once and then again a year later.
A second time.
Yeah. So we had 2 offer sheets today, some interesting ones. Both of them by the St. Louis Blues against the Edmonton Oilers. Both Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway being offer sheeted. I think it's funny that a guy who almost nobody wanted to join the NHL ranks as a general manager again gets a job and immediately gets 2 offer sheets by a former rival general manager. It writes itself. It's so funny. But I thought it would be a fun thought exercise to look to next summer, when we know the Canadiens, they've said it, they're not hiding it. Next summer is going to be the summer they take a big swing. And what is a better, signal to your team that you're going for it than throwing out an offer sheet and putting yourself out there and saying, we want this player so bad, we're going to give him a contract and give up picks if we need to. First of all, what are your thoughts on the idea of the offer sheet? It seems like there's been 8 of them ever. It's not something that people typically want to use once they're in, NHL general manager spots.
I think that's the thing is I feel like it's such a useful tool. I feel like it would make things interesting if it was just an everyday thing that people did. Like if every summer you truly had to genuinely worry about offer sheets, it would be way more competitive for players. I find like it would be like a player's market. And I think one of the biggest things is there's this concept of honor around the league, where if you're going to talk about it that way, why make offer sheets a possibility? Why make them legal in the first place? For me,
Right.
It's a tool that exists. It is absolutely 100% legal. Why don't GMs use it? So I love the concept of offer sheets. I hate the execution, the current state of it. Like, I feel like it'd be really funny if teams had to do at least one offer sheet every 5 years or something. Like, I feel like it would be so good because there would be so much more movement and people would be so much more um they would be so much more I would say careful about who they signed, who they extended offers to, who they qualified, who they even drafted, right? Like, or how they developed a certain player. Like, how do you
Right.
keep somebody under the radar until you're ready to sign them long term and not risk that idea of like them getting offer sheeted, right? So I think it's really, and it's also really funny every time it happens, but it would be
Yeah.
so fun if it was just a common thing. Whereas like now with the St. Louis Blues, the thing that I find really, really funny is that, we talked a lot about how Edmonton, like they went for it, they didn't get there, and like their window is going to close. Like, I don't even know if they really truly had a window as much as they had McDavid and Draisaitl. Like, that's how it feels
Yeah.
like. And so the fact that they're being targeted is absolutely hilarious. And the two offer sheets to two players, and those two players, right? Like, if I'm those players, I'm like, well, you know what? Like, all we've got right now is McDavid. If I want to win a cup, I gotta go elsewhere. I don't know if St. Louis is it. I have to be honest, but
Yeah.
it's just really funny that like, it's like they've got some up and coming players. It could be their depth, and like somebody's trying to take their depth away.
Yeah. Yeah. Hold that thought on the Oilers because I do want to get back to them. But before we do that, I do want to go through really quickly the offer sheet qualifications because it's not as simple as RFA offer sheet them. They have to have at least one NHL contract expire, which is the case for all of these players. So I don't know why they do list that as a qualification. I don't think it really matters. They have to at least have played 80 NHL games if they're a forward or a defenseman, or 28 NHL games if they're a goalie. It applies only to players who have 3 years of NHL service. They must be younger than 27 on July 1st of the year they are signing that deal. They must be without a contract for the upcoming season, and they must be tendered a qualifying offer by their current team by June 25th or Monday after that year's NHL entry draft, whichever date is later. So that's why we are in the place we are now. Getting back to the Oilers, they have another prime offer sheet candidate next summer in Evan Bouchard.
Oh.
He's coming off of an 82-point season as a defenseman, which I did not realize he just did. That's kind of insane. He's available. I found a couple that I thought were interesting. There's him, Noah Dobson out of the New York Islanders. He also had a 70-point season. I did not understand how all of this went under the radar. Maybe I'm just not paying attention. Wyatt
We're a big
Johnston,
market team, Ian. That's why.
yeah. They're the second biggest team in their own market. Wyatt Johnston of the Dallas Stars, 21 years old. He really had a coming out party in the playoffs this year.
Mhm.
He also had, I believe, a 32-goal season, so he's a good player. Alexis Lafreniere for the Rangers, 28 goals this year. Philip Kurashev of Chicago somehow had 54 points on the terrible Chicago Blackhawks. So that,
Mhm.
if we're scaling that to actual NHL teams, he'd probably be pretty good if he played with real NHLers. And Keandre Miller is another one of the Rangers who he didn't have a great season as far as points, just 30 points in 80 games. But every time I watch Keandre Miller, I really want that kid on my team. Like,
Yeah.
he's so good.
He's
So
valuable, right? Like, he
yeah.
provides a lot of value.
Yeah, he's a very versatile defender, right? Like, he's not like, the Rangers have a lot of guys who are very one-dimensional on defense, like Jacob Trouba. You know exactly what you're getting with Jacob Trouba. Same with
Usually a concussion.
same with Ryan Lindgren. You're getting the exact same thing from him. He's going to bleed for that team. Keandre Miller can kind of do it all.
Mhm.
So he'd be really fun. And to that point, I think the Rangers could be a target of a
Other teams.
of other teams. And I love the French term for offer sheet is essentially hostile offer. It's the greatest. They have these are the following contracts the Rangers have expiring next summer: Capo Caco, Alexis Lafreniere, Edstrom, Cooley, Rempe, Lindgren, Miller, Jones, Chad Ruedel, that doesn't really matter, Ilya Shesterkin, and Jonathan Quick. That's a
Wait,
lot of guys who are
yeah.
expiring next year.
I completely forgot Jonathan Quick was even a thing.
Yeah, he was their backup this year, and he actually played pretty well for a while. Shesterkin struggled, and Quick was kind of holding them together. Even in my notes, I wrote Cat Friendly predicts, and Cat Friendly doesn't predict it anymore because they don't exist. Puckpedia predicts that they'll have about $30 million in cap space next summer without taking into account whatever the salary cap goes up to next summer. Even if they have all of that space, they have a lot of big contracts to sign. Like that Shesterkin contract is not going to be cheap. Lafreniere is not going to be cheap. Kako, they're probably going to move on from, but they're probably going to also add other guys. Like I can see the Rangers being a legitimate target. And if it gets to the offseason next year and Lafreniere isn't signed, like as someone who is the host of a Canadiens show, that's all we're going to talk about next summer
100%.
is Alexis Lafreniere coming to Montreal.
I think so. I think it's actually going to start like the closer it gets. Like if he struggles at all, or if like there's like some sort of like quote in the media like indicating any kind of dissatisfaction or a lack of movement with the contract situation, I feel like that's when the speculation is going to start. It is going to come from Montreal media, but the fans are going to run with it, and we're all going to go crazy.
Yeah, and I think the Rangers see this coming as a possibility because they were trying allegedly really hard to get rid of Jacob Trouba at the draft this year. And
which is really funny to me because they defend him to the death, and then now they're like, bye.
Well, between one of them has to defend, and it's not going to be Jacob Trouba. So I just think the Rangers are a really interesting target for next year, especially, the Canadiens saying they're going to take a swing, and with Jeff Gorton knowing that team pretty well, it could be a really interesting spot for the Canadiens to go shopping next year. They're going to have all of those picks. They're going to have cap space. I'm really excited to see how they weaponize not only their assets and all of their draft capital, but the cap space that they have as well.
I think it's really, really interesting. And I love the idea that you said, like, go shopping, because I'm now picturing Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton in that car, like, get in, loser, we're going shopping for Mean Girls. Like, which one of them's the loser? I feel like Kent Hughes will be like in the sunglasses and he'll be like, get in, loser, we're going shopping.
Yeah.
And Jeff Gorton would be Katie Heron in that situation.
Yeah, Jeff Gorton would say he's not my best friend, like he said when you hired the guy. All right, we're headed into our last segment where we're going to discuss viable captains for the Montreal Canadiens should Nick Suzuki evaporate off the face of the earth. But before that, we have to talk to you guys about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. All right, headed into our last segment here, where we're going to take a very gratuitous shot at the Toronto Maple Leafs, because that's what we need to do. This week, you got something?
No, I just wanted to say, like, I'm really glad that you brought this up and you had this as a topic, because we're always asking how things affect the Leafs. And yes. I feel like it's about time that we brought things around full circle and talked about how the Leafs affect us.
I'm so glad you said that, because every time I think of what they're doing, I'm like, this is actually about us. We are the main characters of the story. So the reason we bring them up is this week they'll have a press conference to announce that John Tavares is vacating the captaincy of the Toronto Maple Leafs and Austin Matthews is taking it over. This captaincy switcheroo thing has happened several times in recent memory to teams that have failed to meet expectations, and it has worked exactly 0 times. So bold strategy. We'll see if it pays off. I doubt it does. But it got me thinking, if Nick Suzuki were to disappear, were to just go on a sabbatical and go backpacking through Europe to try to find himself, or some Hallmark movie-esque thought, who could the Canadiens then tap on the shoulder to be the next captain of this team? I want to know what you possibly think of. Like, what's your first thought?
The name that immediately popped into my mind was Caden Gooley. But I also wanted to ask, like, are we talking like what's the most fun scenario, or what's actually like legitimately like somebody who would be considered and would do a good job? I also like that you said, he evaporated or he went on sabbatical, because I feel like when they talk about changing captains and it's not because someone is leaving the team, announcing their retirement, injured, long-term injured reserve, like there's always an element of dysfunction. And I feel like the amount of language that we've heard today about how John Tavares is on board, like, oh, well, actually it was his idea, like, it's all of this. And it's like, really, is that really what's going on? I always have a lot of questions. Like, I do think when you do have a superstar caliber player like Austin Matthews, like that's generally what naturally happens, but usually the Tavares has to like die first, right? Like retire,
Right.
whatever it is, like has to cease to exist in some way.
Right.
So like in Montreal Canadiens, like our hope is that this group never becomes that dysfunctional. It does get, underperforming teams do this all the time. And not only do the Leafs underperform, they underperform literally every year. Like
Right.
it's literally like they don't not do it, right? Like it's
Right.
just like they're incapable. So for me, like the idea of Nick Suzuki being away, like there would be a legitimate reason. Like he's stopped playing hockey and he wants to like go into like, science or something like that.
let's even say it this way. Do you remember that brief moment in the Koivu era where he was gone? I think he was injured. He was out for a little bit. And like for like a game or two, Alex Kovalev wore the captaincy. I have a hockey card of Captain Alex Kovalev, like which is, it blows my mind every time. I'm like, why did they do that? Like, and the whole thing with Tavares that I find really interesting is like he's a UFA at the end of the year. Why did they have to do this now? They couldn't just wait. Like he's not coming back. Just let him play out the last year. Have like a Shea Weber win it for him kind of feeling. And instead, like they just pantsed him in front of the largest fan base in the sport.
And like a fan base that every other fan base loves to find excuses to make fun of. Like that's the thing too.
Right. Yeah, and we're not thinking about anything else right now. It's just like, oh, this is the funniest thing that could have happened at this point.
Right.
But anyway,
and there's no other news. Like you said, we're not thinking of anything else. So like this is like gonna occupy our minds, right?
Right. So I think to your question, I think it's a good point, right? Like that, is it somebody that we want or somebody that we know will end up being the captain next?
Right.
My brain says probably Caden Gooley, like you. My heart would really love to see Mike Matheson wear the C for this hockey team. Like he plays a million minutes every night. Like if there's a guy who I think has earned it in the short time he's been here, Mike Matheson is one of them, right? Like we always rip on him because like, he makes mistakes with the puck, but the reason he makes mistakes with the puck is because he's on for 30 minutes a night. And he always has it.
Yeah.
Like it's just more likely he's going to pass the puck to the wrong guy because there's more opportunities for error. I really like him. We'd be getting a French speaking guy with the captaincy, so that's an easy sell in the market. And I just think he's neat. I really like Mike Matheson. So yeah, I don't know. Is your Gooley pick both a brain and heart pick? Because I think mine are different.
Yeah. Honestly, like my brain is picking Gooley just because it seemed, and maybe it's because he reminds me so much of Shea Weber, like in his
absolutely,
like, in his look and stuff like that. I think in terms of like what they could do is try and give it to somebody like Juraj Slafkovsky, which will not go well. I love Juraj Slafkovsky, but I feel like, even when he's 50, he's going to be a toddler. So I don't see it. You know what I mean? I love him a lot. I feel like the throw a bone pick is probably going to be like a Cole Caulfield kind of thing where, like he is going to be heavily relied upon, maybe now that there's a lot more balance in the lineup. But I think like with my heart, like it's Jordan Harris. He's unassuming. He's not the guy on the team, but he makes such good decisions all the time. He's got this quiet leadership. He's always thoughtful. If you could pick a goalie, which you shouldn't, Samuel Montembeault is very, very cerebral. Like I find like, he's definitely got that personality. He's very easygoing and somebody that I feel people like do look up to and enjoy kind of. But, I think Jordan Harris, and he's one of my favorite players on the team. When he does get traded, which will happen eventually, I will be devastated. And I know that it's not, I don't think that he's the best defenseman on this team. Like I'm very realistic about that. But my head picks is Caden Gooley because I feel like there's just something about him. And I know, like, he did lead his team to championship, all of that. I get that. I just feel like there's something about his presence that speaks poise and leadership.
Yeah, I agree. And if people are tired of hearing us talk about how much we love Jordan Harris, that's not going anywhere. He is like, we are Jordan Harris truthers. Like I want to see him play way more than he has. Like,
Yeah.
I really, really love this player. So I really like that just because he's got the head for it, right? Like, he might not have the on-ice acumen to this point in his career, but like, his head is always in the right place. I really like every time he speaks, I listen. That's the kind of guy and I'm not even on that team. Like, I imagine that's what the locker room would feel like too.
Yeah, and I do have one question. Like, where do you stand, Ian, on the idea that your captain should be the best player? Because I find that historically there's a lot of beloved captains that have been like, a third liner or a second pairing defenseman or someone. And it's just someone that like people say like, oh, this person has heart, they have grit, they have leadership.
Yeah.
So like at the same time, like what they're doing in the Toronto Maple Leafs is they're literally making their best player the captain. And they've done that on other teams. And so like, what are your thoughts on that? Like for me, I feel like it really does it doesn't matter what position they play. It does help if it's a superstar because that means that they'll probably be on the team longer and not get traded within a season or two. But I think it has to do with personality. Like you have to make that selection based on personality, not on talent.
Yeah. And I mean, like, in recent history, we've seen that kind of referendum in Montreal with Max Pacioretty, right? Like the year that he was selected captain, it was going to be him or PK. And that kind of became a referendum of, well, these guys are both they probably have the same impact on the team, like as far as on ice productivity goes. It became a referendum on which one of them is better in the locker room, in which it went to Max Pacioretty, who, as a Connecticut kid, I really enjoyed seeing him wear the C. But I cannot think of another Canadiens captain in my lifetime who has been as ill-suited to be the captain of this hockey team. Like, I love Max. He's a great hockey player. But I think the pressure of him being not only the captain of this team, but the expected offensive leader of this team was just too much for him. So I don't think it's a matter of, who your best player is. It's who your best leader is. And those aren't always the same thing. Some of the times they are. Like Connor McDavid out in Edmonton is the Oilers leader in both points, in goals, and in character and leadership. Like he's leading that hockey team.
Sidney Crosby is a great example of that. Like I find that like, with Sidney Crosby, I always felt like it was pandering when they made him captain so early in his career, but he 100% has that person. Everybody in the locker room listens to him. Everybody looks up to him. It does help when you're the best player in the world during the course of your prime, but there was something about that was so correct.
Yeah. I also think like the Colorado Avalanche, Nathan McKinnon's probably the best player on that team. He's not the captain. It's Gabe Landeskog. And I know he's been out, but that was a choice that was made when Nathan McKinnon was still around. Like when Nathan McKinnon was also on that team. That's a Stanley Cup winning roster. Like they didn't get it wrong. I think that it's very easy to just go with the best player on your team and figure it out from there. But like, is Connor Bedard ready to be that guy in Chicago? I don't know. Maybe it's really, really early to tell. But with some guys like McDavid or like Crosby, there was no mistake to be made. Those were going to be the guys that led those hockey teams.
And I do think that the one thing I'll say, like to circle back to the Leafs, is that Austin Matthews does not have their poise. He does not have their maturity. He tends to lose his head, particularly against the Canadiens. Like, even though he can be, skating circles around them on the ice and beating them in the game, there's something about like the Canadiens' ability to get under his skin that I find that, somebody like a Sidney Crosby is way more mature.
Yeah. And for the Leafs to basically over the last few years make every offseason a referendum on the core four, to now attach that captaincy, to have the opportunity to change it to anybody you want and to attach it to somebody in that core four could be disastrous. Like it could be a big, big problem. And I'm glad the Canadiens have avoided that. There's no doubts of who's the leader on this hockey team. And this was merely a thought exercise that we hopefully will not have to see play out in any point in time. But that's going to do it for us today on Locked On Canadiens. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, head on over to Locked On NHL to see what else is going on around the league. As a reminder, we are free and available everywhere you get your podcasts, including YouTube. So be sure to subscribe to Locked On Canadiens so you don't miss an episode. You can follow the show on Twitter at LO_Canadiens or email us at lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com. You can find Laura at The Active Stick, and you can find me at Maybe It's Ian. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you next time.